Good afternoon. We are getting started. We're going to go ahead actually and get started right away because we have a lot to cover in this particular webinar. But as you are coming in, just to remind folks, you can click on the chat to introduce yourself throughout the presentation, to ask questions or to let us know about any technical issues. In addition, if you need to modify your audio, you can change that under device settings, including you can turn on live captions. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the third and final webinar around the open source community. This one is about creating the proposal. My name is Nancy Copa. I know that you've had the pleasure of having Jackie Hughes and Dwayne Brown on the last two webinars, but we thought we'd mix things up a little bit and I would step in where Jackie had been presenting before. So I'm Nancy Copa. I'm the project director for the Common Education Data Standards. And with me today, once again, is Dwayne Brown, the guru around the open source community. Today, we're going to discuss the homework from last time, and we'll do that through a couple of polls, and you can drop some stuff in the chat, as well as I'm then going to turn it over to Dwayne to talk about how you actually get into the nitty-gritty of creating that proposal. We have templates available. We're going to show you some examples and really talk about what it means to develop that proposal that's going to go through the review process and get those elements added or changed into the CEDS standard. So with that, I'm going to, actually we have two polls. So the first one I'm going to go ahead and launch is, what is the order of the steps? Oh, excuse me, that was the second one, but we'll go ahead and do it. What's the order of the steps for creating an open source community? So what you're going to do is whatever order you think these need to go in, you're going to drag them and just drop them into that appropriate order, and then you'll hit submit. And for those of you that are just joining, I want to make sure that everyone's aware we are recording this webinar so that you can go back and refer to it later, as well as share it with others who couldn't make it today. And right now we are answering a poll about what's the order of the steps for creating an OSC proposal. So I'll give it just another maybe 15 seconds, and then we will move on. Okay. All right, so the order of the steps for creating an OSC proposal are that first, you should look through existing use cases to see if it exists. Then you should submit your use case. Then you research your use case. You create a work group. You submit that formal proposal, which is what we're going to go over today. And then there's a community review. So if you got that right, go ahead and give yourselves a pat on the back. And then one more poll question for you, and then we will get to the homework from last time. So looking at that chart that I just had on the screen that may be covered up with your poll now, the question is, where do you even find these steps for requesting changes that to be made to the OSC? Do you go to Communities 360? Do you go to the CEDS Gitbook, or do you go to CEDS's website, ceds.ed.gov? I'll give you about 30 seconds to respond. Any final responses there? Great job to everyone on that one. Yes, it is the CEDS Get Book. In just a few moments, we will be sharing that link with you once again as Dwayne navigates there to show you around the steps for creating a proposal. So in the meantime, we are going to talk about the homework from last time. Now, the homework from last time was that you find an element in the open source community, you spend some time searching for 2 existing standards. And so in the chat, or you can come off mute, maybe, I think you can come, no, maybe you can't come off mute. So put it in the chat just to be sure. Let's answer the following 3 questions. Were you able to find an element that met the use case? So you having a use case in mind, was there an existing ticket? Then you find that ticket. Were you able to find it in another standard? Then number 2, how long did you spend searching the standard? Either 1 or 2 existing standards. So those standards are things like A4L's CIF, PESC for the post-secondary, IEEE, One Ed Tech, EdFi. Those are the other standards, and we had that bulleted list last time. So go ahead and drop in the chat. Were you able to find an element in another standard? How long did you spend? And then did you face any other challenges? And perhaps I should ask you first, just click the raise hand or any emoji up in the top if you were able to do the homework over the last week. Okay, no problem. It's not a problem. I will tell you that I myself have had to search up elements in these other standards. And so I can tell you from experience that it's not necessarily an easy thing. I do spend a little bit of time because I'm not in those standards on a regular basis. And so it takes me a little while to get in it and kind of figure out where I need to look, what's the right keyword, that kind of thing. And if I'm still having trouble with it, this is when it clicks in my mind that that's where a work group really comes into play. I know we talked a little bit about work groups last time and how to form a work group. This is where they can really help out. If you contact your colleagues and say, hey, I'm really interested in this use case. I think this is the right kind of element. We need to expand CEDS. Do you know anybody that's already defined this somewhere? And then they can help you out with things that they might have used in the past. And you can then ask them to be on your work group at the same time. So it's a win-win. And how long you spend searching the standard really depends on how frequently you do it, how familiar you are with it. If you are, for instance, an EdFi state, then searching EdFi may come very easy to you. If you're not an EdFi state and you're searching EdFi, it may take you a bit longer. So just plan for that as you're starting to build out these proposals. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're using Gitbook. That's where you can find all the steps for what we're going to be doing, as well as what we've discussed in the last 2 webinars. So Dwayne's going to go ahead and drop in the chat the link to Gitbook. And in just a few moments, he's then going to navigate there himself, walk you through how to create the proposal, what all those steps are, how to submit it, and then finally the community review portion. So today, before we do that, I just want to go over, you're going to be using Gitbook. You're then going to look for the create and submit a proposal. It is under the open source community on the left-hand side, if you don't already see it. So it'll be under the open source community, then under the elements repository, there's influencing the data standard. And within that section, there's a subsection for create and submit proposal. It should look like what you see here. And so that is where we will be getting started. So Dwayne, I will turn it over to you now to take them through the proposal process.
Great, thank you, Nancy. As she mentioned, this is the Gitbook site. Here, create and submit a proposal, coming straight from Gitbook, elements for open source community, element repository, influencing the standard. There's some navigation on this side. Create and submit a proposal is going to take you right over to this particular location. We're not going to start right here. We're actually going to start up here at the GitHub site, and I'm going to take you over to the rubric, and Nancy's going to put in a second here the rubric document, a link directly to it. But for the sake of navigation, on the CDS standards GitHub site, in the elements location and in the documents folder, there is a rubric document, which is located here. And this gives us basically the process we've been talking about, steps 1, 2, 3, kind of shows it to you in a flow chart. I'm going to go ahead and download this and open it as a PDF. And we're going to take a look at this here. So what I want to do is go through this section here. We talked already about user submits a use case, right? We talked about the pre-process for that you've researched other use cases, make sure it wasn't already there. It's not in CEDS, you definitely need it. So you submit a use case. We have some basic questions here as far as looking at that. Is it offensive, right? Giving CEDS team opportunity just to close use cases and get rid of anything that really doesn't make sense, doesn't belong there. Does it pass submission criteria? Basically, is it a use case for education? Was it submitted by someone who hasn't give us an email address, it's a contact or whatever? Basically, are these valid use cases that are coming in? Then we look if it's a duplicate or not, right? And so those three are all kind of covered over here in this particular location and the process we would go through. But that's not what we're going to cover today or what we've been talking about. What we're really looking at here is the use case you're submitting. Is it a bug fix, just fixing some grammatical error, adding a comma, correcting a misspelling, etc.? If it's not, at that point, there's a call for community participation. This is where kind of the research begins, right? And we're looking, is there participation and is there a use case lead? Are you taking this on? You've submitted the ticket, you're going to lead the work and the effort in this. And so you're going to do the research. You're going to be looking around. You're going to call for a work group, right? You're going to get people together and try to figure out what is the actual proposal for this. So stakeholder participants and the lead develop proposed use case solutions. Does it meet the CEDS requirements? This is what we're talking about today. You're actually developing that particular proposal, and will it meet the CEDS requirements? What are those requirements? What does it look like to develop a proposal as a work group to actually be able to submit that over to CEDS? That's what we're going to be talking about in here. The rest of this document, for each of these decision points, if you are curious, down below, there's processes, things that occur. So is the use case offensive? It describes what that is. It goes through and it describes, is this a duplicate? What does that mean? Is this a bug fix? What does that mean, etc.? So that particular document is very useful in looking at the workflow and understanding how you're going to get past this particular step, what's going to take place in those various locations. Okay, so but ultimately what needs to happen is you need to submit a proposal. You're going to create one, you're going to submit one. So back over to the Gitbook page, we have two templates: modified element template, which means the element already exists inside of CEDS. And then we have the proposed new template, which means it does not exist inside of CEDS. You're going to actually be creating something new. We're going to open these and take a quick look at what they look like. So this particular one here, we can see your basic information, the use case number. That's going to come from over here. I'm going to click there in the issues, right? It's got a number. This is 766. This is 765, etc. So that's the number, the title that you gave it. That's going to be this: add existing CEDS element career and technical education completer, right? That would be the title. And then the repository. Are you in the elements, the IDS, or the data warehouse? Most of the time, for what we're talking about today, you're going to be in the elements repository. You're adding a new element, you're modifying a new element. So that's your basic information at the top. And then we have down here the various different components. Since this is a new element, everything's new. New element name, definition, format, technical name, usage note, location within the DES, option set, etc. We're going to go through each one of those in more detail. Let's take a look at the modified template real quick. Very similar. What we're talking about here, same things at the top, issue number, issue title. Here we have a couple of spots though, the proposed element name. Are you changing the name of the element? If so, what are you proposing? Down here we have the current element name as it exists in the standard right now. Same thing with definition. Are you proposing a different definition than what we currently have? So you'll list what exists currently for this particular element, and above you will list what you're changing. If you're not changing the element name, it would just remain NA, not applicable. So all these would just stay NA. So whatever it is you're changing. If you're changing an option set or creating a new option set or indating a particular option set, which means we're going to get rid of that option set, then you're going to place those things inside of here. And down below, if an option set is being changed, what was it originally, right? And then we have background information and items like that. So very similar as far as the different components, which is what we're actually going to walk through, those various components of the new and modified proposal templates. Then we're going to go into some examples that have actually been created already. So minor differences between the two documents. In the new element proposal, which we had over here, literally everything gets filled out for the most part. I'll go through some things that are optional. The second section, and the modified one, as we mentioned, the second section just provides information about what existed before the change. For both, we're going to fill out the bottom section, which contains notes and justification for the proposal. It's filled out the same way for both, really, either way, with as much information as possible, indicating the research that went into this, links, stakeholders who participated, and how you arrive at the decision that you're actually placing up here at the top in either document. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the element name. So if you had to fill in the element name itself, how do you even begin to name an element? And Nancy is going to place a link to the naming conventions document that we have over on Gitbook. I'm going to navigate to it. So over on Gitbook and influencing the standard, if you actually just scroll up from create and submit a proposal, you will arrive at review these documents. And we have here the DES definitions, and then we have here the CEDS naming conventions document. So if I click on the naming conventions document, we have basically a document that helps you understand how to name an element. If we scroll down, we have different components to that element. We have an entity, we have a qualifier, we have a property, and we have a representation. We are going to go over each one of these, and we're going to do it by basically looking at the rules that are listed here. Zoom in slightly here. First thing we have is rule number 1. Now, some rules are made to be broken, but they're there for a good reason. So as you're going to see, CEDS element names may not contain acronyms. Is that they may not contain acronyms, or that they shall not contain acronyms? It's really that they shouldn't contain acronyms, but let me take you over here to CEDS. We're going to take a look at elements, and we're just going to do a quick search here. And we're going to look up IDEA. In the advanced search, I get rid of the definitions and the options. I'm just looking at the element name. Note IDEA, which is actually an acronym that stands for the Individuals with Disabilities Act, right? So it may not contain acronyms, isn't quite always the same. If I go search for ISO, this is the International Standards Organization 639-2 language code. If I go take a look at URI, we have various different types of uniform resource identifiers. So you have various different elements in here that actually do contain acronyms. So jumping back over to our naming conventions document, the CEDS element may not contain acronyms. Not always true, but it's there for a good reason. What we're really looking for is don't abbreviate when it's don't abbreviate when it's not going to cause a massive headache. So when do we break the rule? When it's an organization, such as like IPEDS or ISO, or when it's a commonly known acronym, such as IDEA or IEP. There are certain places where we do go ahead and create the acronym. You can search CEDS and you will actually see we commonly abbreviate element names. If not, or if it's new, it's not going to result in an element that's basically 12 words. that's an arbitrary number, then we don't want to abbreviate. So ideally, you don't abbreviate, but if it's very common, it's going to make more sense to abbreviate, then that's something you would put in the proposal as far as the element name is concerned. Okay. Rule number 2, CEDS element names always contain a property term. I have not found an example where this isn't true. It would be difficult to do, but basically when we scroll up for what is a property is what it is. So it's a name, it's a number, it's a degree, it's a level. The element name should, at the very least, tell us what it is. So some examples here, name, title, credits awarded. We have various different types of property terms. It's going to tell you what it actually is. So it's always going to have a property term inside of it. Rule number 3, CEDS element names are always prefixed by an entity term unless the element is common, with a little star asterisk there, element defined for universally consistent application regardless of context. So we want to take a look at what an entity term is. So we're going to come up here and take a look here. Entity terms provide context for an element. In the following elements, we have person accountability report, dental insurance coverage, advanced placement. These are all entity terms. So we can see examples of elements here. Scrolling in this one here and taking a look at those, we see examples of elements that don't have an entity term. So we could have named first name in CEDS student first name. But if we had done that, we would then have to describe every type of human in existence just to give them a first name. So we'd have the parent first name, the mother first name, the father first name, the teacher first name, paraprofessional first name. It didn't make sense. So in that always unless, right, if the element is broadly applicable, then no entity term is needed. But if we have to structure, we're also going to have to then structure the definition and the model in such a way that it can be broadly applicable. So for instance, if you were to say first name, you could not then give it the definition of the student's legal first name, because you've basically provided the definition that constrains first name over to being just the student's. So it'd be the person's legal name. So we use the entity term so that we have reusability of the property term itself. That's why you're going to add an entity term. So as an example, if I just said address, what do I mean? The element name is address. Did I mean electronic mail address as an email address? Did I mean website address? Or did you immediately think of like a physical or a mailing address when I said the word address, such as in street number and name? So if the property you're using is broadly applicable, but there's more than one distinct definition for it, then it's probably missing the entity term. And that's when you're going to have to add an entity term to it. All right, rule number 4. CEDS element names may contain qualifier and representation terms as needed to represent the scope and context of the element. So the qualifier and representation terms help to get even more specific. So you have the property, here's what it is. You have the entity, which gives you a little bit more information, not just address, but electronic mail address, right? To be able to give you that type of information. There can still, though, be more than one way to define it. So if you were to have a particular element and you needed to even clarify it even further, you would then add the qualifier or the representation. So I'm going to jump over here. We'll take a look at an example. Let's pull up this. All right, from the search here, we have GASB. We can see that the first option we have here is a financial position category. The entity is iPEDS Finance, that we may have more than one iPEDS Finance financial position category, right? So in this particular one, we've added in GASB as a qualifier to indicate that this particular iPEDS Finance financial position category is the GASB specifically. So now we've left the door open. In the future, should we need another iPEDS Finance financial position category that is not GASB, we can have another iPEDS Finance GASB financial position category. So it kind of leaves that door open. So when you define out an element, you're like, could this represent something else? And the definition would be entirely different? Yes. Well, then I probably need to add a qualifier to make it even more specific inside of there. Also note, this is one reason right here why we do what is it called? Acronyms. Because can you imagine having this entire thing spelled out? That'd be like a lot of elements or a lot of terms. So the next thing we have over here is finally the representation terms. And here we have common representation terms listed: indicator, status, identifier, descriptor, description, and type. So when do you use these? Let's just jump through each one. For indicator, I'm going to jump over here. You can see all these postfix with indicator on the end of that. These are usually an option set of yes, no, sometimes yes, no, unknown. You can see inside of here, we've got yes, nos, we got yes, no, unknowns. If the element is going to describe something that basically is or isn't, or we don't know if it is or isn't, right? Then that's generally when you're going to have an indicator on the end. It's probably an indicator. Now, we do have some examples that are not yes, no, but more of an either or value. So if we look at the registration participation indicator, participated, did not participate. It's really kind of a yes, no, or an either or in that, but that's why it's an indicator. So you're looking like either this or that, or we don't know. Then that's when you're going to actually use the term indicator on the end of an element. The next one we have over here is status. Taking a look at status. We'll also look at elements that have status in the term. Okay, so this is usually still a defined option set, but we've moved beyond the yes, no to a variety of possible options to describe the status of something. So, and I'm going to show you one right away that's going to have yes, no's. There we go. Not scored, scored. That's what I said. Usually we've moved beyond that. Not scored, scored, scoring at error there. We have response status, correct, incorrect, etc. Type of Braille. So this is when you've left that yes, no behind, the either or, and you've moved on into being able to describe a little bit more. There's other possible options that exist. Jumping back over into here, we have the identifier. When would you use identifier? This is when it's basically a number or letters or a combination to identify a person, an organization, a thing, etc. You're identifying something generally with a unique number or alphanumeric code. So agency course identifier, an activity identifier, an assessment item identifier, the assessment itself identifier, the bank identifier. So all kinds of things with identifiers. One thing to note is when you create an identifier, you will usually create an identification system, not always, but usually create an identification system to indicate what organization or entity is responsible for maintaining that specific identifier. So if there was an organization identifier, well, what organization created that? Is it a Dun & Bradstreet number? Is it a SAM number? Is it a local education agency? Did they create the number? Did a school assign the number? Did the state education agency, et cetera, assign the number? There's usually some kind of a number that, or some kind of a system that goes with defining it. And then those things can have more than one. So an LEA can have an NCES identifier. It could also have its own identifier. It could also have a state education agency identifier. All those are still an LEA identifier, but there's a different system that created each one of those particular identifiers. So they usually are paired together, identifier and identification system. Next, we have descriptor. And I'll just come right out and honestly say I have no idea why that is in this document. We have no examples of that term in an element at all. Not to say you can't use it, but we haven't ever that I can find. So moving on, description. If we take a look at description, basically this is used when there will be a short or long narrative describing something. It will not have an option set. So if we take a look at allergy reaction description, for instance, right? Describe symptoms we know to be associated with a person reaction to an allergen. So various different descriptions located inside of here. A short narrative or a long narrative of the reaction, for instance, the allergy description. Now, real quick, jumping back up into here in the allergy reaction description, close these up here. If we had a standard list of reactions so that we could form an option set list with codes, then we would instead have named it allergy reaction type. We're about to go over the word type. So note that we would using the term allergy reaction. If we had just named the element allergy reaction, we're held there with that word. Like we've lost the use of allergy reaction in some ways. So in this instance, we have allergy reaction description. We could have an allergy reaction indicator to indicate whether or not the person had an allergy reaction. Yes, no. And now we can also have an allergy reaction type if we have a standard list of allergy reactions that could occur. Fever, headache, vomiting, whatever the allergy reaction would be, right? So that's why you have those extra terms, the qualifiers, the representation, the various different things that you're able to add on to further describe what it is that we're talking about. So let's take a look at type since we mentioned type. That is the last one in our list. And we will come over here. And this is when someone, basically a way to remember this is when someone says, hey, it's a blank. And you say, oh, really? What type? So if I was to say it's an address, and you say, oh, really? What type of address is it? Is it mailing or is it physical? What's an accommodation? Oh, really? What type of accommodation is it? Well, they have an allergy. Oh, really? What type of allergy do they have? Right? So if someone can say, oh, really? What type? Then you basically have a type. And so if you look through these, honor roll is the type of academic honors type that you got. What kind of additional credit type? Advanced placement. That's the additional credit type that you got. What type of address is it for staff? It's the mailing address for staff. What type of allergy is it? It's an allergy to adhesive. That's the type of allergy that the person is having. So that's when you would utilize the term type. All right. That is basically the naming conventions. And there are other examples and things that you can read through in the naming conventions document that gives you a pretty good idea, I would hope, of how you're going to come about getting an actual name that's going to be used in your document. So jumping back over here, that's how we're going to fill that one in. So next up, we have the new element definition. How do you go about that process? Basically, it needs to be a full sentence with a period. That's what we're looking for, at minimum, a full sentence with a period. One of the best things you can do when naming an element or defining an element is to find other similar elements in CEDS, pattern after those. Another great tool is resources to use an AI tool. We've been doing this since they've come out. It's a whole lot nicer to be able to feed it something and say, give me a good definition for that. Change this, get rid of that word, add this word in. It can actually help you really wordsmith the definition and end up with a good quality definition that you're looking for. So generally what we need is a full sentence definition that explains what the element is. It cannot be proprietary to any other standard unless that standard is open source like CEDS. Then you can use their definition. So it's very important down here for the definition sake and the option set sake and the element name, whatever it is. In this section where you have the notes, standards, organizations, general notes, important to document how you came up with the definition in the actual proposal. So is it your own words? Is it the words of a group? Is it the words from another standard? Was it copied directly from a website somewhere? Just providing that a detail as we review the proposal. Ideally one sentence, but there are just elements that do contain more than one sentence if it's needed to further clarify and have a good definition for it. The next thing up is the element format. This one kind of tricky to think about at first, but really not too difficult. You basically go into CEDS and find a similar element and use the format you see there. We presently have 58 formats, but not even that many because they're all relatively similar. So if you take a look here, alphanumeric is a format. If you want to restrict the number of characters that you think should exist for that, you can, but essentially this is all just, hey, it's going to be a number or a letter or a combination of numbers and letters. It's going to be there. If you want to be more specific, that it's an integer, then you have this, but that's no decimals, right? If you want to be numeric, but it can have decimals, then you have information over here for that. And then we have some other ones that are various things. This is just going to be number, hyphen, number. And this one's going to be number, hyphen, number, period, number. A color hex code, which is really unique, GeoJSON. And then we have hours, minutes, seconds, or years, months, days, minutes, seconds available inside of there. So you're not looking at a lot that you have to deal with. The only other one that's unique here is the option set. So if you're going to have a standard option set in CEDS, then your format just basically is option set because it will be code based. So jumping back over into here, that's what's going to go in the format. Element technical name, super easy. take this element name from up here, put it down here, and remove the spaces. Problem solved. You can move on to the usage note. Usage note. This is not required. There are several reasons why this may get filled in, but it's optional. One is when you're including a link to another standard. So if I jump over here and we take a look at ISO, International Standards Organization, and I open this up, a lot of languages. You can see the usage note here. We're giving further information. We didn't want to put this in the definition. It's the code for the specific language or dialect that a person uses to communicate. Here, we talk about where we get it from, and we have a link that identifies that. So another time when you may feel that the usage note would be necessary is if you need to clarify something. Ideally, the definition is clear enough, but there are just those occasions when something else needs to be said outside of the definition that describes how you would use this particular element or options within the element. So we're going to take a look at another one. Exit or withdrawal type. And here we have the various different exit or withdrawal types. Scrolling and taking a look, usage notes. Goes into kind of detail, and it talks about the use of 4 of the particular ones and when those are best to be used from a process standpoint. So misunderstood options that exist inside of here and when the best practice for actually using those. So most of the time you're not going to need a usage note, but CEDS is all about understanding. So if you feel like you need to further clarify, then by all means further clarify in the proposal. All right, the last one here we have in this section is the location within the domain entity schema. This is important because it forces us to think about how this element relates to other elements. We have a resource called the Integrated Data Store. It's a database that contains every CEDS element in an infrastructure that relates all of the data together. So the Integrated Data Store, if it was fully filled in, you could discover that this particular student was in classroom A, and you could know that they were taking Algebra 2, being taught by Teacher Smith. You would also know that classroom A is located in facility B, which was built in 1973, right? You could know that student A, who's in that Algebra 2 class, took the Algebra 1 assessment. You could have the item level results, which are linked to the state's learning standards, i.e. competencies, and that provides information about which learning standards through the assessment item the student struggled with and which they were successful at completing in Algebra 1, right? So all of this kind of has this ability to link together. So a whole ecosystem of element relationships. The ontology, if you're familiar with that we're developing right now, is even more about that ecosystem and is working on defining not only the elements, but the relationships between the elements. You don't have to know, though, how to work with the ontology, and you don't have to know where in the integrated store it's going to go. As an aside, if you do know where it should go in the integrated store, provide that in the proposal, as it'll make it easier for those of us developing the IDS. But at the very least, what we're needing here is where it's going to live in the domain entity schema. That's going to help us understand where it fits within the ecosystem. So taking a look real quick at the DES, under data model here, is it going to be in K-12? Is it going to be in post-secondary? Is it actually a credential? Is it part of assessments, right? Is it part of learning resources? Like where does it live in this particular location? It might live in more than one, and you would express that in the document. We feel like this is going to go across all of them, right? If you open up a particular area, it's an assessment. Is it part of the actual assessment itself, the construct of assessment, or is it part of the results that come in assessment? We're talking about the score specifically, or something about a score. And so it'd be an assessment results, right? Or are we talking about the early learning family? Are we talking about the identification or family household information, right? So what folder and folder, subfolder does this particular element belong in? That's going to give us information about that. One other resource that we have, going back to this, right above the naming conventions, this document can help you decide where your element should live. So this document here basically describes the domains and entities, and gives you definitions of the various different folders. So when you see a folder out there, what is that folder, and should my element belong in those particular areas or sub areas within that? So that's another resource that you have available to you there. All right, last thing in this top section is the option set information. If you're going to be creating a standard list of codes, then those would be listed in this section here. When should you include a standard list of codes? Basically, one, when it's already standardized in another standard. Great, you can just pull those over. So we got it from PES, we got it from EdFi, we got it from SIF, we got it from EdFax, we got it from iPads, we got it from CRDC, whatever. There's a standard list of options that already exist, and you can put those in there. Or if you can get 3 or more organizations who you're working with in the work group to agree that what they need and would use is in that list, like there's a consensus about it. They don't have to use all of them in the list. So you can have some that you come up with that are not, basically you can have some that you come up with that are not, everybody's not going to use them all. I'm only going to use these 5 and I'm going to use these 4 over here, but that's okay. It's still a standard list of options. Okay, so that's when you would do that. Essentially, there's consensus. Sometimes it's highly unlikely that there can be consensus, though. And other times, consensus just requires a lot of hard work. So real quick, I'm going to take you over to an element inside of here and show you when consensus was pretty much impossible and what we did there. So we have fund classification, financial account fund classification, financial account local fund classification. This is the fund classification. This comes from NCES handbooks, or NCES basically providing a list related to finance, general funds, special revenue funds, capital funds, etc. There are additional fund classifications that states may have locally that no one could possibly ever agree to. And so for that, we defined the element, but chose not to go any farther than, that they could define their own option sets for that particular element. It was going to be impossible. And for finance, there were several things like this, where beyond what NCES has for finance, there are additional codes that states use, that districts use. And so we developed a construct in which you could have both. You could have your own codes, and you could also, which we have a definition for, and then you could have the NCES codes, and those should be able to roll up into that one location. So that's an instance where we decided we cannot make an option set list here. But sometimes it just requires hard work. So if I was to jump over and take a look here in the issues, and we look at dropout reason, it took us several months to get here, but there is a proposal. And in that particular proposal, we came up with several different dropout reasons. So why did the student drop out? The list can be expanded, but these are the reasons why they dropped out. And if you take a look below, we had to do some alignings. There were a couple of states, several states on the call in the work group participating in this, but we were primarily trying to align North Carolina and Mississippi options, right? So here's what North Carolina had, here's what Mississippi had, here's the proposed CEDS definition in the middle. And we went back and forth on definitions and proposed descriptions and proposed definitions to come up with that. And it took several months of work, but eventually we arrived at a standard list of dropout reasons that both North Carolina and Mississippi said, we can use those. Those actually would work in implementation for us. And so we were able to actually go to that point. So jumping back over into here, option sets, different things that you have to put inside of here. It takes work. It can take effort if it's not already a standard list. There are 2 types of formats, as I showed you before, the yes, no unknown. Those do not require an option definition. So it's just basically yes, yes, and yes, no, unknown, right? That's all there is. So no definitions would be there. Everything else basically has a definition. If we go take a look back in here at another element, we're going to look at the blended learning model. That's not spelled correctly. All right, so you can see here's the option set rotation model, and then we have a definition here which explains what a rotation model is. So we have the definition, and then we have a definition explains that, explains flex model, explains a la carte model, etc. If you can be specific in the definition, great, where you can actually explain what that description means. It's very good to be specific in the definition. There is, however, a shortcut if you cannot be as specific. And I don't know how to spell accommodation type. And that is to use the definition in the definition of the element in the definition of the description. So additional example items tasks. Additional example items tasks is specified as the specific accommodation necessary for assessment or instruction. So you'll see all of these actually pull in the description plus the definition of the element to form the definition of the option set. Not the best way to do it, but we have to have a definition for elements that are not like the yes, no, unknown. So that is definitely one way that it could be done. I'll actually say that the National Center on Educational Outcomes presently is working on a project to standardize all of these accommodations and give them proper definitions. They expect a proposal in like May of 2024. But that said, you have to include a definition there. All right, and the last thing is the codes that have to be indicated. So over here, you have to put in some kind of an option code. Here's how you go about that particular process. Staying on this, if the code is already numeric and you're adding a new code to an existing element, you find the highest number in the lists. Like you can see, we have 03517, but look, here's 75005. If that's the highest number, you simply add to it, then it becomes 75006, and that becomes the option code for the next one. If the code, as we saw with blended learning, if the code is text, then you figure out a nice short code, something for related to the description that would become the code if it's an already existing element. If you're creating a new option set list, then you're going to want to use a numeric code starting with 1000. So if we take a look at project-based look at learning, project-based, and it's got a hyphen. You can see here, starting with 1000, 1001, 1002 would be the codes. There's reasons why we would like to move to numeric codes as we're creating basically new elements. One other thing always to do is include other as an option in your code list. If it's numeric code, it's 999. If it's a text code, then it would just be the word other. And so that is then the coding system. Okay, the other one related is if it already exists in a standard. So let's just take a look here real quick. PESC award level type. We don't touch these codes. These belong to PESC. So you can see that they're different, but this is their particular element, and we just pull it into CEDS for it to be used. And so there's a variety of different coding structures over there. So if you're going to pull it over from another standard, great. Use their codes, because then we don't have to do any translation. It's better that way to reference and to maintain that particular thing. And finally, we have the bottom of the document here. So how does this solution solve the use case? They open some kind of use case. How are you actually going about solving that with what this proposal is? And then we have other standards or organizations analysis. What did you look at? What other agencies? What other standards? What other organizations? What websites? Just everything that you come up with that helped you do your research. We are going to want to see that we looked at this particular standard, didn't find anything. We looked at this standard, it didn't find anything. So we went on our automated decision. So we're looking for due diligence there to make sure that standards were reviewed and then nothing was found. So definitely include that in that section if you don't find anything, but do proposal. And then general notes, anything else that's going to help anyone reading this understand why we made these decisions up at the top. That's going to tell us why at that location down below. The last thing to talk about is what we call a breaking change. And this is a change to an element name. So scrolling back up to here, an element name or an element option code that's going to impact the physical implementation of CEDS. So people have implemented CEDS and they're using data. We don't want to break any of those implementations ideally. So a change to an element, a change to an element or option definition that radically alters its meaning historically, probably we need to create a new element rather than radically alter historical meaning. So we try at all costs to avoid breaking any, doing breaking changes. If you do think that the change that you're going to make is going to require a breaking change and make a change to this, that's probably a good time to reach out to CEDS and contact us. Okay, so last thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at one completed proposal here. Let's take a look at the homeless one, and let's jump over into here. Nancy will put a link into that particular document there. And I'm going to pull that up. Issues. Just to take a look at what actually a filled out proposal looks like. So scrolling down here. All right, so here we go. It was issue 3, the title, and then it's a modified one, right? So proposed element definition, we're actually the primary nighttime residence of the person at the time the person was identified as homeless. The primary nighttime resident of the student at the time the student was identified as homeless. So here's an example of one where we're changing the definition. We're not taking away historically. It's still the student because we know it is a student based off of other data. We're changing it to person to make it more broadly applicable to not just be to be a student. We also had some changes to option sets. So we've listed those in here. Here are new option sets that we're adding in. Here are changed option sets. Where we're basically changing probably the definition of those option sets. And then down below, providing some descriptions. You can see we talk about the different changes that we made, deprecating shelters, doing this, updating the definitions and option sets to represent full sentence definitions, adding element to early childhood learning. We're looking over here at general notes, providing information about awaiting foster care and what occurred with that, and definitions that we found that exist inside of legislation, links to McKinney-Vento, an excerpt from EDFAC's file specification, information about transitional housing, Wikipedia searches, HUDuser.gov, a homeless hub, right? So just extensive research done to take a look at what is actually occurring in relation to this element, and then providing those details inside to be able to help us understand how did we get to, so right, we have here, how did we get to the changes that we are actually proposing up above? And so someone would be able to read through that document and understand and say, I understand why you changed the name here. Or changed this to person from student. I understand why you made these changes. Do I agree with the changes? That's something I can put in the comment or not, but I can read through this and I can understand the proposal and why the proposal was made and what research went into that. All right, so you've created your proposal. You're ready to provide it to the community. What's the next step? That's back over inside of here, influencing the standard. Create and submit a proposal. What we have here is standard proposal language. So proposed solution for this. This is the actual Word document. So the template that you created, that you filled out, that's got the completed proposal, has all the notes. You're able to just drag that in as a comment and then provide this type of language inside of there. So if we were to go in here and you were to look at this and you were to grab the standard language, and well, let me scroll. If I just grab this real quick, I'll just go over in here, proposed solution, right? And then I was able to drag a document, so I could just grab a Word document, drag it over into here, and then I would click comment on that. That's going to inform the CEDS team that you are ready to have your proposal be reviewed. And so we'll then start taking a look at that. We'll review it. What are we looking for? Does it meet the convention, naming convention standards? Is the definition complete sentence? Was due diligence done to search other standards? Or at least 3 stakeholder organizations involved? What are we not looking for? Do we agree with the change? That's not our call. So it's your call. You guys are proposing this. You are the stakeholders. So that's what we're looking for. If you've met the rubric requirements, as we've talked about before with the rubric document, then you are ready to actually submit that process. If we do have any feedback, we will reach out directly to you, or we'll respond in the comment section, or maybe both, as far as, can you change this? Can you tweak this? Did you check this? Did you look at that? Those types of things. Once we accept the proposal, we're going to change the label in this particular location from in development to pending community approval. That's going to inform the community that there is actually a that it's ready for review. Like we're saying, this is going to be added to CEDS at this point. There's also a process of whether it's 30, 60, or 90 days. 30 days for basically bug fixes that don't involve breaking changes, or for moving an element from that already exists in CEDS from one location in the DES domain schema to another location in the DES. Those are 30-day changes. Almost all other changes are 60 days that we give a time period of. Once pending community approval is hit, then a countdown sort of begins at that, almost at that point, but I'll explain in a second. But there's time to review the process, time for the community to review. The 90-day review is breaking changes. So if you're going to break that element name, you're going to break that code, and we need to do it, then we're going to put a 90-day review on it. So we give people plenty of time to actually take a look at that. Now, based off of our rubric, which is not here anymore, here it is. Let's jump into here. The 30-day. Actually, let's go to announce. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. Once we have actually had the proposal, we put pending community approval, we make an announcement to the entire community on the GitHub site. That's the pending community approval. An announcement is also made. It used to be through the GRADS community discussion thread, but now we send that out through an email. So every month we send that out, and then we also announce it at the next CEDS open source monthly review meeting. Once those three things have taken place, the 60, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day countdown process begins. It's open to there. Everybody can review. They have opportunity to comment. They can comment directly on the ticket itself in the comment period. If there's all positive comments or no comments at all, after that time period is elapsed, it becomes part of the standard. If there's any negative comments to the contrary, then the process through the rubric, which you can read in later if you like to, it goes through a process, an iterative process, to get it updated based off of the feedback that was provided. But once it goes past that 30, 60, 90 days, all positive, it's a done deal. It's part of CEDS, and the only way you can change it is now to open a new ticket, and we will mark it as approved by the community. And once we've released it on the website every February, then we will change it and let you know the version it was actually released in. I know that was a lot to take in. I'm going to hand it back over to Nancy for hopefully a quick wrap up here. Take it away.
Thanks, Dwayne. So where do you go from here? Dwayne just gave you a lot of information on how to create that proposal. We have the first two webinars on even how to get to that proposal phase. Where do you go from here? Well, if you already have an element that you're interested in adding or modifying in CEDS, of course, we will be sending out the webinar links so you can refresh yourself on how to find those. In addition, Dwayne mentioned that at the CEDS OSC monthly review meeting, that's when these tickets come up. That starts that 30, 60, 90-day process, as well as just mentioning brand new tickets that come out in case there are folks that want to join a work group on those. So I would highly encourage you on the November 6th meeting, and Dwayne's going to drop the link to that in the chat, but to go ahead and join that meeting. It is an hour. Sometimes it's a little bit less depending on what we have going on that month, but highly encourage you to start there if you want to start anywhere. What you're seeing on the screen are our events. You can find those on the Communities 360 site. Dwayne will be dropping that in the chat as well. But all of these meetings are open. You can go there. If you go to the Communities 360 site, you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see the events. You can click on any one of those. It will provide you the link to that event so that you can join the meeting, you can participate, you can just listen in depending on where your comfortability might be. So with that, we have just 1 minute left. I did keep looking in the chat, monitoring it. We did not have any questions come up, but should you have questions, please email us at ceds@ed.gov. That's CEDS@ed.gov. We'll be more than happy to help you. The webinar links will be coming out probably early next week. And so you can refer back to those. You can send them to any of your colleagues who might be interested as well. And we appreciate you joining us for this webinar series, and we look forward to assisting you in the future. Thank you.